Hello everyone and welcome to Daily News Simplified, your one-stop solution to detailed analysis of current affairs which are published in the daily edition of the Hindu newspaper and are equally relevant for your UPSC preparation. Articles dated 13th of January 2023 are listed on your screen and the time stamping along with the notes in PDF and Word format are given in the description box. So let us begin with the first article for the day. This article of the Hindu newspaper appeared on page 16, that is the business page, and tells us the status of industrial output, basically the industrial growth rate that has been registered in the past 3 months. Now the industrial growth, which we normally measure through the index of industrial production, has rebounded to 7.1%. Now when we compare this with the previous data, which was around 4.2%, it is really a good jump given the kind of global pre-recession crisis is going on and the given higher inflationary pressure that India and the globe together is facing. So it is a good sign for not only Indian economy but also the global economy, because India is now emerging as one of the larger industrial player in the international market. So India's industrial output has bounced back to its previous datas, which were close to 7 to 8%, and this has been stated as per the recent estimates given by the index of industrial production. As far as syllabus mapping of this topic is concerned, so the effect of liberalization on the Indian economy, especially after 1991, changes in the industrial policy and their effect on the industrial growth. So as the syllabus itself talks about the industrial growth, today we are going to look into that how this industrial growth is measured using the IIP and what are the basic challenges that India's industrial sector is facing with respect to different dimensions. Then we will also look into some of the schemes that has been launched by the government of India to provide basic incentives for the industrial growth. At last, we are going to look into a practice question that you can see. The question states, industrial growth in India has been below its potential. What are the basic impediments in achieving industrial growth in India? And also state government initiative in this regard. After this entire discussion, you will be in a position to answer this question with an ease. So before getting into the basic challenges of the Indian industrial sector, let's talk about the findings of the latest index. As per the IIP, manufacturing sector has achieved a higher growth rate of 6.55% against 6.1% previously. Mining has also accelerated to 9.7%, which is one of the highest growth achieved in this category, and the power generation has also climbed in its own parameter. Now, coming back to the industrial sector, which is the basic aim of UPSC's mains examination. Well, Index of Industrial Production is published by National Statistical Office. The base year which is used in this index is 2011 and 2012. Base year is the year which is used for comparing particular commodities and its particular change over the period of time. So it is like this. What was the production of car industry in 2011? And that should be compared with the present car industries and its production. So let's say in 2010 we were producing 100 cars, but now we are producing 190 cars. So what is the increase? So there is an increase of 90. And this comparative analysis is based on the criteria of base year. The sectors which are considered under the index of industrial production include mining, manufacturing and electricity. As we have already discussed, manufacturing sector consists the highest share of production. The goods which are considered under this index are intermediate goods, capital goods, construction goods, consumer durables and consumer non-durables. Consumer durables mostly include the consumptions items or items which are for durable use. For instance, the refrigerator or the television set which you have in your households. Highest weightage is given to the primary goods and lowest goes to the capital goods. Index of 8 core industry is something which is different from index of industrial production, and this comparative analysis is also important from the perspective of prelim examination. This index is published by Office of Economic Advisor under the Ministry of Commerce and Industry. This person is also responsible for maintaining the cadre of Indian Economic Services. The base year also remains the same in this category, and the 8 core sectors are coal, crude oil, natural gas, petroleum refinery products, fertilizers, steel, cement and electricity. This was once asked by UPSC in its prelim examination. Highest weightage given to the petroleum product and the lowest goes to the fertilizer. Now let's go through different challenges that are thrown to the industrial sector in India. We have categorized these challenges into 4 headings: the policy related challenges, growth related challenges, input related challenges, or you can also call it as backward linkages, and the output related challenges, that is the forward linkages. So let's start with the policy first. As far as taxation is concerned, so India has one of the severest form of tax policies according to the International Monetary Fund, World Trade Organization, and even with respect to UNCTAD. India has too many GST rates, so we have more than 5 rates, where India is also going through the high corporate tax, which is still about 20%. And even there are instances of tax terrorism to the business person who are working in the industrial sector. Not only that, when we come to the ease of doing business, despite being good performer in the 5 years, India's overall performance with respect to certain cities have only improved marginally. Ease of doing business, it is a very limited exercise and covers very handful of cities. So what is happening across India is not being covered. So despite good performance in ease of doing business, we cannot conclude that the entire industrial sector in India is performing well. Then comes the issues of MSME. So the policies toward MSME, whether you talk about the MSME Act or you talk about the classification, all these initiatives have yet not provided the ample space for the MSMEs to grow. For example, they suffer from the lowest share of credit. So if you talk about the Economic Survey 2021, it states that despite having the largest share in terms of units or the number of units performing in the industrial sector, MSME has remained one of the least per capita receiver of institutional credit. As far as policy uncertainties is concerned, so most of the states across India have been observed to have policy uncertainty. Some provide benefit in one area while others totally skip that. There is a backward technology. Government has been reluctant to provide the latest technologies at cheaper rate. There's a poor access to quality of infrastructure. So most of the industrial town have been catering to the needs of large industrial sector, while the small or MSMEs have been neglected to a larger extent. Special economic zone or the SEZ area have been one of the good example to showcase this. Then this sector also suffers from the cheaper Chinese goods and their inbound selling in Indian market. The policy of the government have been towards restricting certain high level imported goods from China, while on the other hand smaller goods including those which are prepared for MSME sectors such as plastic goods have mostly been replaced by the cheaper Chinese imports. Then comes the issue of SIC units. So the policy on SIC units have been more or less similar for the government despite going through various ups and downs in the economy. For example, the SIC units and their policy in 2008, if compared to that of 2013, has remained more or less same. 2008 was a boom period while 2013 has shown the pre-recession crisis in India. And the same is true in 2021 when COVID crisis was going on. The SIC units have remained more or less similar in terms of policy parameter. The revival of SIC units is not very smooth. The long legal battles have been observed when the people or the entrepreneur find to go for wrapping up their business. Then comes the regional differences in the policies. Poor performance on the capital, labor, skill, education and access to market have created the regional disbalances. So when you compare, let's say, the state of Gujarat that to the state of Bihar, so the policies made by these two states are different. You will find that number of MOUs signed by the Gujarat government is far more than that of the Bihar government. So the policies at the regional levels are also different. There is no substantial industrial policy has been rolled out since the 1991 reforms of liberalization, privatization and the globalization. And lastly, as far as policy on different laws are concerned, especially the labor laws, it has been very cumbersome. Despite rolling out 4 labor codes, government have not been able to streamline the demand of the labor sector working in the industrial area. Then comes the issues related to the growth. So if you go about the economic survey of the previous year, you will find that the industrial contribution to the gross value added is still under 30%. While in China and other industrialized countries, it is close to 50% and even higher. The reason here being simple that the highest share in India's GDP comes from the service sector, in which IT and IT enabled services have been taking the major chunk. Then comes the issue that despite having the lower growth rate, the highest share comes from the manufacturing sector. So when we talk about the mining, when we talk about the construction sector, or when we talk about, let's say, power generation or electricity, their share has remained more or less stagnant in the overall contribution to the GDP. Service sector has beaten up the industrial sector in capturing the incoming foreign direct investment also. So as we have discussed, the IT enabled services, telecom, have been the largest receiver of foreign direct investment and even the foreign portfolio investment in comparison to the industrial sector. And the last growth related issue is that because of the global recessions and the higher inflation, India's overall export growth has been very, very dismal. Even in the last 3 years of the COVID, what we have seen is that there were a number of instances where export growth have been quite low when compared to the import growth. And this has kept the overall current account deficit as a matter of concern for India. If we talk about the input related or the backward linkages for the industrial sector, the first issue would be found in terms of manpower. So the manpower available in India is not industry led. Let me give you an example. If you talk about the nations like Germany, France, US, Japan or even China, will find that the demand which industry is putting up in the economy with respect to the manpower they require is what they are actually receiving. While in case of India, the demand put up by the industrial sector with respect to the required manpower is not easily being met. The reason is that there is educational differences. They have poor demand and supply gap in terms of skill. They have been lacking the vocational training and there is low mechanization on their functioning. Let me give you an example. If we talk about the automobile sector, the first thing that comes to the mind is the working of robots. And when robots are working in the assembly unit, it is desired that the labor should have the high level of mechanization knowledge. But that labor does not have required education and skills, so their ability to utilize the mechanized production process is quite low. Then comes the issue of machines. So machine is an important input. But in India, most of the sector, especially the MSME sector, goes through the obsolete technology. There's a limited transfer of technology from other states. So still there are certain sectors where the obsolete or the old technology or the backward technology is being used, especially in the sectors like handloom. We are also lagging behind in terms of the implementation of Industry 4.0, where cloud computing, artificial intelligence and other high-tech technologies are being implemented for bringing the higher efficiency in the production process. There is a very limited funds available for the research and development area. So when we talk about the robotics, for instance, so the industrial sector that is utilizing the robotics today in order to have higher scale of production is not having that much efficiency that they can produce the robots on their own. Because of the limited research and development in the industrial sector, Indian industry have been finding it difficult to produce their latest technology at cheaper prices, and they have to rely more on the machines which are being imported from outside. The moment we talk about the imported products, it automatically increases the overall production cost, which ultimately hits the profit of a company, and makes the product expensive in the market. And as we have been discussing that because of the cheaper Chinese inputs, industrial sector has already been lagging behind. Then comes the issue of capital availability. Now, capital is also one of the input, the money that industries require to run a business. So now India has already an underdeveloped capital market. The first thing that arrives to an entrepreneur or an industrialist is that they require capital investment for the further expansion of their business. They cannot approach the capital market every time because India's capital market that is being identified through the Bombay Stock Exchange and the National Stock Exchange has been very dismal in terms of providing the credit to the smaller player. And because of this, there is a higher reliance on the bank credit by these important industries. So we have the recent examples where the giant industrialist Adani took a large amount of loan from the banking sector because the availability of large credit was not there from the capital market. Now, because of all these issues, there is a poor financial performance of the businesses. They have to pay large amount of interest on the loans that they are taking. Gross capital formation has increased only by 8% annually in India. Now, gross capital formation means that how much industries are actually investing every year. Now, it was around 100 in 2011 and 12. It increased to 180 in 2022. Simply means that investment has not drastically increased by these industries. Lower capital means lower output. And the last issue is that India has higher capital output ratio. Now, capital output ratio is denoted by K by Y, which means that how much capital you require to produce a particular unit of good. Now, higher capital output ratio means that for producing, let's say, 1 unit of an output, we require 4 units of capital. And higher the ratio is means more investment is required to produce 1 extra unit, which is not a good sign for the industrial growth. In terms of output, the last mile access to the market is very limited, especially in far eastern, far western or far northern areas of India because of the geographical terrains. We are unable to provide the hinterland poor states to the global markets. Multiple levels of checks and balances are there. So if a product has to cross through, let's say from Delhi to the Mumbai port, they have to go by different states. They have to abide by the rules and regulation and the taxation policies of different states. Poor infrastructure that could not connect the market to the rural suppliers. And rural economy is one of the largest sections of Indian economy. And if they are not able to generate the industrial growth because of the poor market access, it is a matter of concern. Then comes the Indian goods faces quality standard issues at the international market, whether you talk about sanitary, phytosanitary measures, or we talk about the packaging issues. Indian goods have been subjected to various terms and conditions under the World Trade Organization and even have faced border restrictions to many countries. Then comes the issue of intellectual property rights. Some of the products which India has produced have been subjected to the copyright issues, have been subjected to the trademarks and even to the industrial designs, and that restricts the overall development of the small scale industries in India. China, on the other hand, have been grossly violating the IPR issues and have not been paying much interest to the WTO related norms. And the last issue is higher logistic cost. In comparison to US and many European countries, because of the poor accessibilities to the hinterland, because of the poor infrastructure developments of the road and the portlands, logistic cost in India is very high. Now, because of the higher logistic costs, the overall competition and the competitiveness of Indian industrial sector is far behind that of the global partners. Now, in order to rectify most of these challenges, Government of India has launched number of schemes to provide a boost to the industrial sector. Now, please understand, industrial sector is a wider concept. Manufacturing is just one part of the industrial sector. It includes mining, it includes construction, it even includes the electricity. So the industrial sector in India have been provided these ample evidences and support for their growth. For example, there is Make in India, in which the government aims to make India a global manufacturing hub, bring it to the 25% of the GDP, and create 100 million jobs. We have Skill India to provide the basic skills for the job creation. There is a Shram Suvidha portal. We have random inspection schemes, universal account number, and the Apprentice Prosahan Yojana. Even the defense procurement policy have been targeting to increase the overall industrial development in the manufacturing of defense technology. Then comes the National Manufacturing Policy that has targeted to provide the technological acquisition and the development fund. It also provides for the clean, green and energy efficient technologies. Pradhan Mantri Mudra Yojana is going to provide loans for the small businesses which do not get first-hand access to the credit availability. Startup India has been proactive in generating and promoting the entrepreneurship in India. And the same is true with respect to Stand Up India in terms of women, SC and ST communities. In terms of infrastructure development projects, we have Bharatmala for road development, Sagarmala for port development, we have dedicated freight corridor for the railway development, and government is also rolling out the development of enterprises and services hub, also known by Desh, to replace the special economic zones. And the last one is production linked scheme. Now, most of these schemes have already been covered in much detail under the DNS headings. So in order to find out more discussions on these schemes, especially the production linked scheme and the Desh program, you can go and search with respect to the Raus DNS and type the particular topic in the search bar and you can go through the video. Now with this entire discussion, now I am coming back to this question. Industrial growth in India has been below its potential. Now you know why it is below its potential. What are the basic impediments or the hindrances in achieving the industrial growth in India? You have ample evidences for that we have already discussed. And you can also write many of the government initiative in this regard. With this discussion in place, let us now move to the next article for the day. This article of the Hindu newspaper appeared on page 12 and talks about a debate between whether there should be parliamentary supremacy or whether there should be constitutional supremacy. And because of all this debate, there has been the constitutional development and the maturity of judiciary in India. Now, yesterday, the Vice President of India, also the Chairman of Rajya Sabha, has questioned the legality of Keshwanand Bharti case, one of the most important case in terms of constitutional development in India. And questioning this, they have also questioned that the judgment of the Supreme Court under National Judicial Appointment Commission was not in favor to the development of parliamentary sovereignty. Now, this has opened the Pandora box. This has also questioned that should India go with the parliamentary sovereignty model of United Kingdom, which was the colonial power ruling in India and which has also provided the majority of constitutional provisions that India has adopted. Should they go for parliamentary sovereignty or should the power of judiciary to review the constitution should be unlimited? Now, Parliament of India can amend the Indian constitution, that is for sure, because constitution provides for its own amendability under the Article 368, and here the role of parliamentary is supreme. When it comes to the amending of the constitution, Supreme Court does not have power under Article 368. The Rajya Sabha and the Lok Sabha, along with the final assent given by the President, can amend the Constitution of India. But after the Keshwanand Bharti judgment case, the power of judicial review under Article 13 of the Indian Constitution was reinterpreted, in which it was made clear that Parliament has the power to amend any part of the Indian Constitution without breaking down the philosophy, important provisions given in the basic structure. For example, the appointment of a particular law officer, the appointment of a particular election commission, or the changes in the fundamental right, they can do so. But if that goes against the basic structure, for example, rule of law, for example, the federalism principle, for example, the independence of judiciary, that should be declared null and void by the Supreme Court. Now, NJAC verdict is one of the landmark verdict in which judiciary remains supreme despite the majority given by the Parliament towards the passage of National Judicial Appointment Commission, along with the provisional support given by the states through their legislative body. Now, when NJAC was struck down by the Supreme Court, the executive across the state raised this point that they enjoy the highest level of trust by the people. They are the political representative. People have given vote in a democracy to elect these representatives. And if these representatives argue that Supreme Court and the other High Court judges should be appointed along with the participation of the executive in the NJAC, then who is Supreme Court to question that? Now, after the NJAC judgment, it has remained more or less a bitter relationship between the executive and the judiciary with respect to the judges' appointment. Now, as far as NJAC, collegium and the judges' appointment is concerned, we have discussed that multiple times in the previous DNS. So, you can search Raus DNS collegium system in the search box of YouTube. Today, we are going to look into the syllabus mapping of GS paper 2 with respect to the Indian constitutional scheme in comparison to the other countries. So here we will look into the UK model of parliamentary sovereignty. Along with this, the structure, organization and functioning of the executive versus judiciary will also be looked into. So we will go by the speech of the Vice President. We will look into what is parliamentary sovereignty and why India does not have this model. How judicial independence in India is ensured, what are the instances of judicial activism and the overreach, advantages of judicial activism and the problems associated with the judicial overreach, and ultimately we will also go through the possible way forward. So as far as observations on the Vice President's speech is concerned, these are as follows. The Chairman of Rajya Sabha or the Vice President in 258th session of Parliamentary Sovereignty and Supreme Court declaring the Constitutional Amendment 99th as invalid, the Vice President has to say that parliamentary sovereignty is inviolable, which means that the democracy lies in the prevalence of the ordainment of the people, which is reflected through the legitimate platform. If the member of parliament or the member of legislative assembly are elected by the people, it simply proves that parliamentary sovereignty is inviolable in any democracy. Whatever parliamentary do or say is of the topmost priority. Judiciary is not the elected body and the say or the actions of the judiciary should not be over and above the parliament. The second argument given was that the constituent power of the parliament under 368 is supreme. Now, parliament's power to amend by the way of addition, variation or the repeal of any provision of the constitution in accordance with the procedure of Article 368 is unqualified and supreme, not amenable to executive action or judicial intervention. So as per the Vice President, Constitution itself has provided that the amendability power of the Parliament is supreme and should not be diluted by any other organ of the Constitution. Then he has also argued that the amendment power of Parliament has strengthened the Indian democracy. For example, the inclusion of Part 9, inclusion of Part 9A or any other provision, changes that have been brought into the fundamental rights or the changes that have been brought in order to include or exclude India's territory or even bringing the new states have strengthened the Indian democracy. Now, what democracy here means? Democracy here means that when the choices of the people, the voters, is being met by their political representative. So whatever changes we have seen, whatever changes we have observed in the constitution have come from the amending power of the parliament and not that of the judiciary. He has also argued that Supreme Court declaring the NJAC was unconstitutional. Why? Because according to him, Parliament has enacted the NJAC along with the concurrence of majority of the state, and when political representative enjoying the choices of the people, then it should not be declared as unconstitutional by the Supreme Court, while the declaration of NJAC itself was unconstitutional. He also says that NJAC judgment of the Supreme Court diluted the parliamentary sovereignty because it denied the choices made by the political representative enjoying the trust of millions of people. He also argued that the Supreme Court judgment compromised the parliamentary sovereignty and the mandate of the people should reflect in the law making. Let me give an example. Government has passed an act with respect to the triple talaq. Government has also passed provisions with respect to the Companies Act. They have also passed provisions with respect to the goods and service taxation. Now, most of these legislations are being supported by the choices of people. Even if they are creating a new state, let's say the state of Telangana. So when this state was created, it was based on the choices of the people and not the choice of Supreme Court. So the mandate of the people is reflected in the lawmaking, and that mandate should not be denied by the Supreme Court. Now all these arguments are given by the Vice President, and this clearly proves that he has supported the parliamentary sovereignty. Now what is parliamentary sovereignty? This principle has not been defined, although it is practiced in UK and also generated in UK. This ideology says that Parliament is the supreme legal authority which can create or end any law it has previously made. Court or any other organ of the government cannot overrule the legislations passed by the Parliament, and no Parliament can pass laws that the future parliaments cannot change. So with respect to UK, any law that they are making, so if NGAC was made in UK, judiciary in UK would never had any chance to struck it out. No person, no body in Britain has a right to override or set aside the law made by the Parliament. And this is the reason why there is parliamentary sovereignty and not the constitutional supremacy. Now, what is constitutional supremacy? In India, we have constitutional supremacy, which means the constitution is supreme and not the parliament. Here we have checks and balances on the amending power of the parliament. So Supreme Court through Article 13 can look into a particular law and can declare it null and void. Article 144 makes that the judgment given by the Supreme Court are binding in all the courts. So if tomorrow Supreme Court brings any particular provision in particular law, that will be implemented in all the states in the country and nobody can deny that. And the constitutional supremacy was evolved over the years. And the benchmark was the Keshwan and Bharti case in 1973, where Supreme Court came up with the doctrine of basic structure. And after that, this doctrine has expanded like anything. And because of the basic structure and the implementation of Article 13 by the Supreme Court and the High Courts, they have come up with the judicial activism. Now, judicial activism simply means that now they are actively participating. It means that they are coming on their own in order to provide the rights of the humans, in order to implement the theory, the principles, the provisions of the Constitution on their own. Previously, it was the case that whenever there was a appeal which was signed, whenever there was a case, then only Supreme Court or the High Court will take the action. But now Supreme Court or the High Court are coming up with their own preemptive actions in order to control something which is going against the constitutional scheme in India. And this is what judicial activism has to say. But because of the excessive use of judicial activism, there have been certain instances where judicial activism has become judicial overreach. Overreach here means that the preemptive actions taken by the judiciary has now been acting as a hindrance to the functioning of the executive or the legislation. For example, there was a case where Supreme Court has implemented a provision that the liquor shop should be at least 500 meters away from the highways. Now, there were thousands of liquor shops where hundreds and thousands of people were involved, they were employed, and hundreds and thousands of crores of rupees were invested in building those infrastructures or shops cannot be shifted overnight. And even if they are shifted overnight, it will create law and order situation for multiple states. Now, this is something which has created a friction between the executive and the judiciary. Any such implementation, any such law that has been brought, which does not go with the smooth functioning of the governance, is now being clearly seen as judicial overreach. Judiciary has been seen to create law on its own. And the moment judiciary start creating law on its own, and judiciary being the non-representative body, there is threat to the democracy. If judiciary is going to create laws, what will the MP and MLAs, or what will the parliament, what will the president do in India? And that is the reason why judicial overreach has been questioned time and again. Now let's talk about the basic advantages of judicial activism and judicial overreach. Do we really need parliamentary sovereignty or not? So we need judicial activism. Why? It addresses the inaction on the part of legislation and executive. For example, if we make India parliamentary sovereignty and tomorrow parliament bring a law which takes away the right to life and liberty, can judiciary say anything? No, because there is parliamentary sovereignty. It makes judiciary vibrant and pro-people against what it was in the past. It helps in the protection of the spirit of the constitution. It has widened the definition of multiple provisions. For example, Article 14 of right to equality, Article 19 of right to freedom, 21, 32 and many others. It promotes transparency and the accountability of the governance. So in India, there's a democratic setup. We have welfareist governance. Government make provisions in order to bring welfare to the people. If they don't, who is there to question them? Through judicial activism, judiciary is now standing firm to question that why government is not taking any accountability or transparency. It prevents the arbitrary state action where they have been curbing the citizens' fundamental rights. For example, Supreme Court has upheld the right to privacy. Now, upholding the right to privacy means that now citizens' right of having private affairs in his own life should not be questioned by the state. And this is all because of the judicial activism. It ensures the checks and balances on the executive. For example, the corrupt cases of 2G scam, coal scam have been brought to justice because of the judicial activism. So because of the judicial activism, we say that parliamentary sovereignty is not required. But on the other hand, there is judicial overreach. It destroys the spirit of constitution and democracy on the separation of power, because as we have discussed, parliamentary should take the majority of the decisions. It creates conflict between the legislation and the judicial. Who is going to create the final law? And do they have the authority to create law? It diminishes the trust of the people because they came to vote for a particular government. It results in the tyranny of the unelected as the judges assume the central position of lawmaking. Entertaining all PILs result in the overburdening of the judiciary itself. So now they are not having more time to clear out the constitutional provisions. All these points prove that parliamentary sovereignty could be brought up in India in order to control the judicial overreach. Now the question is, what should be the ideal way forward? The ideal way forward that judiciary has been seen to overreach and intruding in the space of executive that should be avoided. Judiciary must take the case of being the guardian of the constitution. They should interpret the constitution in the best possible manner, and they should go with the judicial restraining order. They should avoid the face-off with the other parts of the government such as legislation and the executive. So the basic conclusion is that judiciary should go for judicial activism and avoid judicial overreach. On the other hand, government should also provide ample platform to the judiciary to have good interpretation of the laws and the constitutional provisions to benefit the citizens overall. With this discussion placed, let us now move to the next article for the day. This article of the Hindu newspaper appeared on page 14 and talks about the recent status of missing doctors in India. Now, community health centers is now being facing 80% shortage of specialists as shown by the Health Ministry data. According to the Rural Health Statistics Report 2021-22 published by the Union Health Ministry, India is one such nation which has a shortage of specialist doctors with a shortfall of nearly 80%. Now, instead of having 10 doctors in a hospital, there are only 2. And this is at the level of community health center, which are very essential for rural health infrastructure. The report has found that specialist doctor lagged by 83%, obstetricians and gynecologists by 74%, physicians by 79%, pediatrician by 81%, and even the women health workers and auxiliary nursing midwives, that is A&M, are also short by 14%. And this is a very dark truth to take on. Now, lack of doctors simply means that if a patient goes to the hospital, he or she is not likely to get cure. Absence of doctors also proves that there are two important problems. One, the recruitment is not up to the mark. And the second, if the recruitment is up to the mark, doctors are remaining intentionally absent from their work. Now, in this report, we are going to find out what community health center is all about. You should have basic understanding for this examination that what is the basic structure of rural healthcare system as well as what is the 3-tier health infrastructure of the country. We'll also talk about the important issues with respect to community health center and look into the possible way forwards. Now, as far as community health center is concerned, so in India we have the following infrastructure of rural healthcare system. At the top level, we have community health center, below which we have a primary health center, and then we have sub-center at the lowest level. All these three are found in the rural India. The categorization is based on that how many beds are there in those particular areas and what is the number of medical officers, doctors, specialists are available at those areas. In the lowest level of health centers, we will find that auxiliary nursing midwives are there. At the higher level, that is community health center, there will be specialist or specialized doctors. For example, gynecologist. But at the lower level, we will find that mostly the people from rural India are involved in providing the healthcare services. If we look into the entire pyramid of health infrastructure, we will find that the primary health level includes the primary health center and the sub-health centers, above which is the secondary level, which includes the community health center. So if we go by this diagram again, the first is the secondary section and the other two includes the primary health care. And this is how the entire health infrastructure in India is defined. So this will help you in the further reading in the time to come. Above secondary level, we have the tertiary level, which includes the district hospitals and the medical colleges. Medical colleges are the topmost positions, for example, AIIMS in Delhi. These are the top level of hospitals which are not only providing the healthcare services to the people but are also generating doctors themselves. As far as district hospitals are concerned, so they are created at the population of 25 lakh. Every medical college has almost 750 beds. Now let's talk about the basic issues faced by the community health center. The first one is of course the infrastructure. As far as infrastructure is concerned, so they lack the basic rooms, they lack the parking system, clean toilets and others. And because of the shortage, the facility is serving more people than they should have. There is lack of personnel, as it was mentioned above. Almost 80% of the doctors are absent. There is lack of fund. So budgetary allocation as per the economic survey has strongly recommended that the public spending should be increased to 3% of the GDP from the existing 1%. Now lack of fund also creates the number of deaths. In rural India, especially in the case of child health, children die because of the lack of availability of oxygen and glucose system for their survival. What should be the ideal way forward? The ideal way forward is that fund and the functions should be provided to these hospitals. There should be the streamlining of the health data. Door-to-door data should be collected and these centers should be made accessible using that data. Regular health camps should be conducted by these health centers, including the diseases like tuberculosis or the lifestyle diseases like hypertension and diabetes. There should be focus on the democratization of the rural health, which simply means that the experiments of Mohalla Clinic of Delhi or Swasth Kalyan Samiti used in Haryana can be implemented in other states also. Through this, we will be in a position to maintain the better standards in secondary healthcare system. With this discussion place, now we come to the end of today's Daily News Simplified. Thank you and stay tuned for more such updates.